Fitzwilliam Darcy must find a wife by Christmas. Mr. Darcy's Christmas Wish, a Pride and Prejudice variation, by Lysa Shimkus. Prologue. November 29, 1812. What do you suppose my aunt wishes to speak to us about? Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam shuffled a deck of cards in his hands as he spoke from his spot by the fire. There is no us, for it is I whom Lady Catherine de Bourgh has summoned. Fitzwilliam Darcy stared out the window overseeing the gardens below, his chest tight and his nerves on edge. He despised surprises and would have liked more detail on why Lady Catherine de Bourgh had summoned him. He also detested spontaneity, which was how he received her invitation that morning. His ride to Rosings Park was less than enjoyable, and he hoped to have been sent away within an hour or two. However, he was invited to dine, then to play cards, and now to wait in the drawing-room for the women. The door to the room opened and the older lady strolled into the room, followed by her pale and fragile daughter. The former's eyes grew round at the sight of both gentlemen in the drawing-room. "Richard, whatever are you in here for?" she asked, her eyes on the gentleman by the fire. The colonel straightened. "I've come to see if my cousin would be in need of any assistance." "Assistance he does not. Although my dear Anne is growing weary. See to it that she makes it to her room, will you?" "Yes, m." This left Darcy to stand before the window, as his aunt slowly made her way to the settee by the fire. Both of the cousins exited the room and closed the door behind them. "Do come sit down, Fitzwilliam," Lady Catherine de Bourgh instructed. "If you do not mind, madam, I prefer to stand." In truth, Darcy was afraid to sit by his aunt. Her demeanor was always cold and stiff, and should one be near the woman, one would surely turn into a block of ice alongside her. "Very well." The older woman sat herself down and fixed the wrinkles of her dark violet dress. There was a long silence before the woman spoke again. "I suppose you have guessed the reason I have asked you here." "I'm afraid not, dear aunt. I do not know the nature of your needing my presence this evening." "It's about your duty." Darcy fought the urge to look skyward. "This nonsensical talk once more. Before your father died, I swore to him I would see you happily married." Darcy waited for her to say to my daughter, but the older woman did not. "Did she imply it though? Pemberley is such a gorgeous house, and it needs a mistress to see to it." Darcy wished to ask why his sister, Georgiana, could not play hostess until Darcy felt ready to marry. He'd had the conversation with his aunt many times over, and he knew there was no changing the woman's mind. In addition, his sister was extremely shy. It's possible the young lady would lock herself in her room all day than give orders to the staff. "Mrs. Reynolds makes a grand housekeeper at Pemberley," Darcy assured his aunt, his eyes still on the gardens. "And my work has kept me away from finding a suitable match." He could think of many reasons as to why he was still a bachelor. The most important being that Darcy didn't wish to marry and take on marital responsibilities just yet. "Nonsense. You have dined with many families, I hear. And what about Hertfordshire? Do not you visit there often?" Hertfordshire was home to Netherfield Park, where Darcy's friend Charles Bingley resided when not in the city. The country had few neighbours. Darcy could name only two maidens whom he'd consider handsome. The older woman continued. "Darcy, you are nearing 30, and it's time you settle down. I cannot keep holding on to this promise I have made to your father. The sooner you wed, the sooner I can rest at ease knowing that I have fulfilled your father's wishes." He could not understand how this burden fell upon his aunt, for Darcy was not in need of a guardian any longer. He was also not yet 30, only 8 and 20. However, he knew his aunt had his best interest at heart, if not so she could boast about her part in his marriage. He just wished she'd cease throwing her daughter at him as a prospect. And had the misfortune of having been born with a weak heart. This left her pale and weak all her life. Her daily activities included reclining in a chair, playing lightly at the piano, and being read to. Darcy himself preferred a more active lifestyle, with riding to fencing to working. He could not see himself locked up in a room all day, all to entertain an ailing wife. He much preferred an equal. Tonight, Lady Catherine didn't mention her daughter once. Has she finally respected Darcy's wish not to marry his own cousin? What about that Miss Caroline Bingley? Lady Catherine de Bourgh inquired. She is rather beautiful. Darcy smirked to himself. Beauty was all Caroline possessed. Again, Darcy could not see himself as husband to this particular young woman, one whose only hobbies included cards and gossip. Miss Bingley is a good friend, but I'm afraid that is all she serves. There was silence once again, but the tension in the drawing-room told Darcy his aunt still had a lot to say on the subject matter. He was correct when she sighed and said, "I suppose if you are to object to your duty, then I must withhold the master classes, on the piano, from dear Georgiana." Darcy had braced himself for some form of manipulation, but he was caught off guard by the use of his sister. Bringing her into the mix only poured salt upon injury. True, Georgiana loved the piano. She had been wanting to better her skills, and knowing that Lady Catherine de Bourgh hired a master to teach her daughter, Darcy inquired if the master could teach his sister as well. Lady Catherine was all too willing to pay for both girls' lessons. But now she was using it as blackmail. Darcy didn't know how to respond. Should he retaliate, the older woman would have something clever or nasty to say. If he were to have Georgiana withdrawn from the master classes, his sister would be devastated. Darcy didn't want to disappoint his beloved sister. At least by Christmas, the older woman pleaded. "I beg your pardon." Darcy finally looked over at his aunt and could see sincerity on the woman's usually stern face. "At least find a match, by Christmas. Cannot you make releasing me of this burden a gift to an old woman?" "A gift?" Lady Catherine de Bourgh made this sound easy. Christmas was a month away. How was Darcy to find a betrothed in such a short period of time? He did not have his cousin Richard's charm nor his friend Bingley's amiability. He especially did not have a knack for falsehood like George Wickham, to deceive his way into a woman's heart. However, the sooner Darcy fulfilled the task, the sooner he'd cease hearing from the woman about his duty. He tired of the subject since she first pressed him to marry 5 years ago. But he needed to be sure things went his way, and that Lady Catherine de Bourgh could not manipulate the circumstances nor blackmail him any further. "I will agree to this under 2 conditions." Lady Catherine stiffened but said, "Name them." "That you will not interfere with my courtship to any lady I choose, and you will allow Georgiana to practice the piano until Christmas." The older woman nodded her head, though her shoulders were still tense. Darcy was surprised his aunt did not attack his words nor assert herself. Either the woman had also grown weary of the subject, which he highly doubted, or she had a glass of brandy before entering the room. The latter seemed more likely. "Very well." Lady Catherine relaxed and sat back with a small smile on her face. His aunt still considered this a win on her part. Fighting back an irritated scowl, Darcy gazed back out the window. How was he to find a lady worth courting in a month's time? Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that should one close their eyes for another moment, one is bound to rise late for church. Such an event occurred to Miss Elizabeth Bennet on this Sunday morning. Lizzy, as she preferred to be acknowledged by, was soon scurrying off toward the direction of the village church, tying her bonnet strings under her chin and muttering how she was going to have a chat with Jane, as she wrapped her shawl more tightly around herself. She arrived at the parish just as her family stood outside its doors, greeting the pastor. Lizzy slowed her steps so as to join them in a calming state. "Lizzy, where have you been?" their mother spoke over her shoulders. "Pardon my absence, Mamma, for I was preoccupied with a missive from Charlotte Lucas." Lizzy told a falsehood she hoped no one would discover. Charlotte Lucas was not only their neighbor but Liz's best friend. "Oh, that Miss Lucas, could she not wait till after we break our fast to send a correspondence?" Lizzy needed not reply, as the Bennets were soon ushered into the pews. The pastor's sermon on this first Sunday of Advent made Lizzy wish she were back in the warmth and comfort of her bed. She'd heard the sermon for as long as she could remember. However, being the second eldest of 5 daughters, she needed to be a better example to her sisters. Sisters whom, she noticed in that moment, were idling in one way or another. Mary was struggling to keep her eyes open, while Lydia and Kitty whispered and giggled among themselves. Only Jane, the eldest, listened intently alongside their parents. Jane was always the better example, and Lizzy was grateful for her. After service, the Bennets returned to the cool and cloudy outdoors, where Mama strayed to gossip with the neighbors, Papa spoke to the pastor about Advent, and Liz's 3 youngest sisters sought out friendly faces. Lizzy took this opportunity to speak to Jane, whom she pulled to the side. Jane was the most handsome of the Bennet sisters. She was also sweet, docile, and amiable, which was why Lizzy couldn't understand. "My dearest Jane, how is it you did not rouse me this morning?" Jane shot her big round, blue eyes. "I did, sister, but it was you who sent me away. Do not you remember? You said you were not to accompany us this morning." Lizzy could only recall rising late. "Thankfully Mama only took notice of your absence once we arrived," Jane continued. "I'm terribly sorry, sister. I shall not heed your request come Sunday next." A smile broke upon Liz's face. How could she remain vexed when her sister was all too innocent? "The fault is all mine. I should have known I gave you orders whilst drowsy." It was at that precise moment that Papa joined them. "Come, my girls, I think it is time we break our fast. Your mother can join us when she grows hungry." At the breakfast table, in which the family enjoyed cold cuts, bread, butter, and chocolate, Lydia exclaimed, "What are we to wear to Netherfield Park?" Lizzy smiled over at Jane, who blushed instantly. Netherfield Park was currently on lease to Mr. Charles Bingley, Jane's betrothed. They'd been engaged as of Michaelmas. The Bennets had been invited to dine that evening. "Lydia, my dear, we will go to Meryton to gather new things," Mama replied, "and should you not find what you need, you may borrow from Kitty." Lydia was the second youngest, and their mother's favourite. Kitty, on the contrary, always stood second best. When Kitty objected, there was an uproar of conversation, and Lizzy could only comment on how lucky Jane was to soon be away from their family drama. The eldest would be mistress to a big house, and the only individuals she would have to worry about were Bingley's 2 sisters. Even then she could avoid the gossip-hungry women by disappearing to her duties. Lizzy envied her sister, in a good, gentle manner. She envied Jane's good nature, her beauty, and her future. However, should any lady be worthy of such a good man as Bingley, it would have to be Jane. The two were a match made in heaven. "Oh, it's such a good thing Bingley's returned to Hertfordshire," Lydia remarked. "I wonder if Mr. Darcy will be there as well," Kitty added. Lizzy winced at the name. Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy was Charles Bingley's best friend. The two were inseparable and also influential of the other. Before Bingley's return, Lizzy learned that Darcy had been involved in his absence, convincing his friend to return to London for a long period, in hopes that Bingley would forget about Jane. Lizzy never forgave the man for interfering with her sister's love life. She detested the man, not only for poking his nose where it shouldn't be, but for insulting her at the Meryton ball when they first met. He had deemed her unattractive for his tastes. His words had wounded Lizzy. Although the latter did not acquire blonde hair and blue eyes like Jane, but rather brown and brown, she still considered herself pretty attractive. Darcy's words, however, cut into her insecurities. For if a man as handsome as Darcy, though lacking in good nature, did not see her as worthy, who would? "Come now, girls, we have a lot to do." Mama's words cut into Liz's thoughts. Their mother soon had the table cleared, and every Bennet woman was on her way to Meryton. Upon arriving at the High Street, Mama and the youngest 3 girls disappeared into a shop to buy lace, ribbons, feathers, and the latest fashion. As for the older 2, they made for the bookshop. Within were only 2 other customers, a gentleman by the register and an elderly woman. Lizzy adored books. They were her greatest companions. True, Papa had a large array of books in his study, but they held only the classics. Lizzy wanted to browse the latest bestsellers. It was not long before Jane joined her side, with the older woman near her other side. "Excuse my prying," Jane said, "I couldn't help but notice your reaction at the breakfast table." Lizzy closed her book. "What do you mean?" when Mr. Darcy's name was mentioned. Lizzy held in a laugh. "Oh, Jane, do not let my troubles bother you. I have yet to forgive his behavior of late. Cannot you let bygones be bygones? I cannot marry a man whose best friend is despised by my sister." Lizzy searched her sister's face for a teasing gesture but found none. Jane was serious. "Did I hear you say you have troubles with your beau?" The older woman closed the gap on Lizzy's other side, and Lizzy nearly blushed. Mr. Darcy was not her beau. "It is easy to be blinded by our pain and stubbornness," the woman continued. "However, should we allow a wall to be built, those dearest to us may be a loss forever." Lizzy was speechless. She wanted to thank the woman for her words, but the latter was not yet done. "Take myself, as an example. When I was still young and beautiful, a young neighboring boy fell in love with me. He was charming indeed. However, he had spoken some rather truthful yet hurtful words, and I never forgave him. He then attended university and I never saw him again." The woman's eyes seemed to trail off into the distance. "Thank you for your words of wisdom," Lizzy replied. The woman nodded to the sisters and returned to her own browsing. Jane, however, had been eyeing Lizzy with an arched eyebrow. Upon realizing the eldest would not let the matter rest until Lizzy had a response, the latter sighed and replied, "I will behave if Mr. Darcy behaves." The sisters exited the bookstore, arm in arm, with no new novel to devour. However, Jane was more cheerful and light-hearted, and Lizzy more distressed. She had been considering the older woman's words. Could Lizzy truly lose the love and attention of her sister if she continued to remain stubborn toward Mr. Darcy? She squeezed her sister's arm more tightly. For the sake of Jane, Lizzy would try to be more civil toward her future brother-in-law's best friend. Chapter 2. "Miss Bingley, how kind of you to invite us to dine with you." Fitzwilliam Darcy listened to the only loud conversation at the table, that of Mrs. Bennet and Caroline Bingley, their hostess. Darcy had been seated away from the other two men at the table, and therefore could not speak of politics or other. And the ladies to either side of him, Miss Elizabeth and Miss Kitty, were quiet sorts. Although Darcy did not mind the youngest Bennet sister, the other woman always seemed to make his blood boil one way or another. In the past, it was due to ridiculous banters. Tonight she completely avoided his eyes. It was as if he were invisible to her. He couldn't comprehend her treatment. Had he wronged her recently? "Have you heard of turtle soup?" Mrs. Bennet continued in her loud tone. "I hear it's the latest fashion. It was on the Townsend's and Lucas dinner menus. Why, we dined with them just last month, did we not, Mr. Bennet?" At this comment, Miss Elizabeth dropped her soup spoon. Darcy wondered if perhaps she had not been well all evening, and was therefore less inclined to make conversation with him. "Are you unwell, Miss Elizabeth?" He leaned over to whisper to her ear. "Yes, I'm fine, I assure you." "Thank you for your concern." She still wouldn't look at him. Instead, Miss Elizabeth spoke from her profile, and Darcy could make out a slit in her one eye and a tight jaw. The damn beautiful woman was indeed upset with him. It took all the strength in him not to slam his fist onto the table and demand a response as to why. It was insulting not to be acknowledged, and even more so to be spoken to so coldly. Darcy blamed their hostess for seating him by the awful yet handsome woman. He knew Miss Bingley envied Miss Elizabeth for many reasons, and the former knew he and the latter did not bode well. Their seating arrangement was all a gain for Miss Bingley. "I pray your sister is also in good health?" Miss Elizabeth's question took Darcy by surprise. She was actually speaking to him. He turned his head to look at her. "Yes, Georgiana is very well indeed. She has been mastering the piano." Darcy hoped his last remark would keep a conversation flowing between them. However, it was Miss Bingley who spoke instead. "Ah, Georgiana. How is she, Mr. Darcy?" Darcy tensed. Their hostess knew better than to interrupt a conversation. He would have to speak to her brother Charles, his dear friend, about her behavior and seating chart. However, he chose to compose himself for the rest of the guests' sake. I was just telling Miss Elizabeth that my sister is indeed well, and she has been mastering the piano. Oh, how wonderful! Shall we hear her play come Christmas? I do love some seasonal music. If my sister is inclined, although she is rather not fond of crowds. Then I shall ask her to play just for my own ears when I see her next. Miss Bingley gave him a smile that did not move any other muscle on her face, and Darcy gave her a nod before returning to his soup. After supper Charles Bingley insisted they walk the grounds. Darcy knew his friend wished to spend this time with his betrothed, so he agreed to assist Miss Elizabeth and Miss Kitty. Their walking companions consisted of Miss Lydia as well. Upon reaching the outdoors, the youngest girls chose to walk arm in arm, leaving Darcy and Miss Elizabeth to follow last. The air between them was cold still, literally and figuratively speaking. Darcy wished to break the barrier but had not the faintest idea how. It was Miss Elizabeth who came to the rescue, and he admired her ability to speak so freely. "Is not the night air refreshing, Mr. Darcy?" she inquired. "Yes, indeed it is." "Do you walk often at Pemberley?" Pemberley was Darcy's family estate. He inherited the land, after his father's death, 5 years prior. "Actually, I ride." "Ah." Darcy did not wish for their conversation to die. He was not fond of small talk and wished he and Miss Elizabeth were on better terms, so he could comfortably speak openly around her as well. "And do you ride, Miss Elizabeth?" "Yes, but Papa cannot spare the horse, so I walk often." "I do enjoy riding." "Then you must come to Pemberley and ride. My stable is full of mares and stallions who enjoy the outdoors." His companion looked up at him with dark questioning eyes, and Darcy felt his heart skip a beat. Miss Elizabeth's eyes were just as beautiful as the rest of her face. Darcy had always been captivated by them since they first met, although he could never voice this. Embarrassed, Darcy's next few words came in quick bursts. "As a matter of fact, I know the perfect mare for you. Her name is Lady, and she is sweet and gentle." "How thoughtful of you, Mr. Darcy." Miss Elizabeth smiled at him, and Darcy noticed how the corners of her eyes crinkled, and the rest of her rosy face seemed to lift. Rosy cheeks. The woman beside him must be cold. "Miss Elizabeth, you are cold. Here, let me offer you my coat." She refused the offer, and Darcy felt as if he'd just been punched in the stomach. "Are you sure?" "Yes. A bit of cold actually makes me feel more alive and awake." Miss Elizabeth gave a small laugh, and Darcy felt less pained. Her laughter felt like music to his ears. They strolled in silence for some time before Miss Elizabeth asked, "Will you have family coming to the country for Christmas?" "No. My extended family tends to go abroad for the holiday. It will only be Georgiana and myself this year." "What of Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam?" Miss Elizabeth was referring to his cousin, whom she has met on occasion. "I am uncertain as to his schedule, but I will be sure to ask." "Your Christmas sounds lonely, for poor Georgiana I mean." "Then you should come and keep her company." Darcy wasn't sure where this suggestion stemmed from, but after speaking the words he felt certain his sister would enjoy Miss Elizabeth's lively presence. As would he. "Are you—" "Yes, I am quite certain. I will have Georgiana write you an invitation." Darcy did not want another rejection from Miss Elizabeth. He only wanted to hear her agree with him, for it signaled that his decisions were safe and acceptable. He wanted her to view him as a good man, so they could forget their banters in the past and possibly grow a friendship. Darcy has seen how amiable Miss Elizabeth could be toward his cousin Colonel Richard, and even toward his sworn enemy George Wickham. She was also sweet and kind toward his sister. Darcy longed to receive Miss Elizabeth's tenderness, sweet words, praises, and even smiles and laughter. He was weary of their silence and coldness toward the other. It was a battle he swore Miss Elizabeth brought upon them. The woman detested him since they first met. Could it be that she envied him for his estate and money? Darcy felt his body heat with fury, and he tightened his fists at his sides. It was not his doing that he was born into a family of responsibilities and wealth. He much preferred a life like the Bennets, who could do as they please and not affect the whole nation, or so he thought. And his blasted Christmas duty. What's that? Miss Elizabeth asked. Had Darcy spoken his thoughts out loud? The heat that had been rising in his chest was now in his face. I was just recalling a Christmas wish of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. What has she asked from you? A new shawl, perhaps. Darcy realized that if he were to form a friendship with Miss Elizabeth, like all his other friendships, he had to be honest with her. She has asked that I be engaged by Christmas. His companion stopped walking and looked sternly up at him. Christmas is but 3 weeks away. Annoyance took hold of Darcy. He did not need to be reminded of his deadline. I am well aware of that, Miss Elizabeth. Oh, of course. I beg your pardon. Miss Elizabeth began walking again. I was just shocked by your news. It sounds so sudden. You can imagine my same shock when Lady Catherine de Bourgh first proposed, no, adamantly requested it of me. And you do not object. I have very little choice. She has threatened that Georgiana's piano lessons, which she has been taking at Rosings Park, be ceased should I refuse. Miss Elizabeth gasped, and Darcy was grateful she understood the calamity of his situation. Lady Catherine de Bourgh would do such a thing to Georgiana. Yes, and as much as I would wholeheartedly remove Georgiana from the lessons and have her trained at Pemberley, I know she enjoys her lessons with Anne. The two young ladies study well in the presence of the other. I see. If you were to withdraw Georgiana, she may not take to the studies well on her own. Darcy nodded. He was amazed at how sympathetic Miss Elizabeth was. She was such an understanding creature. Where was a soul like her during Darcy's upbringing? He had been in need of an Elizabeth all his life. At this thought, Darcy felt his ears burn and his heart beat fast. Did he truly need Miss Elizabeth? Is that why he longed for her friendship? Come, Lizzy and Mr. Darcy, we are returning to Netherfield. Darcy was jolted from his thoughts as the youngest Bennet strolled past. It was now much darker out, and Darcy could tell his companion was getting cold as she'd been holding her shawl tightly around herself. Miss Elizabeth was such a stubborn creature as well. Darcy offered his arm to her, which his companion accepted, and the coldness of her hand seeped through his layers. The corners of Darcy's lips twisted upwards. He'd been friends with Miss Elizabeth's willfulness for some time now, and it was beginning to bother him less and less. Chapter 3. Make haste, Lizzy, make haste. Mrs. Bennet rushed into Papa's study, where Lizzy was reading. What is it, Mamma? She could not think of why their mother would be needing her so soon. Jane is to dine with the Lloyds, and she cannot find her other glove. It is possible she left it at Netherfield Park. Lizzy looked up at her father, and her same smile reflected on his face. They hadn't been to Netherfield Park in 2 weeks. If Jane's glove had gone missing for such a duration of time, surely it was a purposeful act. Mamma did not notice their shared moment as she exited the room as quickly as she had entered. Oh, we are ruined. If Jane cannot attend with matching gloves, the Lloyds will surely tell the town. We will be a disgrace. Lizzy only needed to give her father a questioning look, to which he nodded, and she sought after their mother. Mamma, yes, I will go with Jane to Netherfield. Upon arriving at their destination, Lizzy was seated in the drawing-room, whilst her sister and Miss Bennet ran a search through the house. It was also in that moment that another guest arrived. Miss Elizabeth. Mr. Darcy's low voice could not be mistaken. He stood at the threshold in his dark riding habit. Lizzy stood to greet him. Good afternoon, Mr. Darcy. What brings you to Netherfield Park? Bingley and I are to ride this afternoon. And yourself? Jane may have misplaced an item when we were last here. She is currently searching the house for it with Miss Bingley. There was an air of awkwardness in the warm room. Lizzy did not like the tension. She wished she and Mr. Darcy had started on better footing. Perhaps if he hadn't arrogantly wounded her pride, nor interfered with Jane and Bingley, they'd be on good terms, always. Lizzy also disliked her pride. Her ego was so small and fragile. If only she were more carefree like Kitty and Lydia or unbothered like Mary. Are your parents well? Mr. Darcy inquired. Yes, they are. My mother was throwing a fit that we will be the talk of the town should Jane not find her missing glove. Lizzy giggled at the memory of her mother and quickly recomposed when she saw Mr. Darcy's eyebrows rise. And your father? Is he bothered by the scandal this could cause? Lizzy looked up at Mr. Darcy and could see a small smile on his face. He was teasing. This allowed her to relax once more. No, not at all. It was then that a maid walked into the room with tea and cakes. Won't you come sit down while you wait, Mr. Darcy? Lizzy gestured to the seat across from her, which the other took up. Unsure if she should pour them tea or wait for their hostess, Lizzy folded her hands in her lap. Is Georgiana well? Mr. Darcy's sister was always a good subject to start with, as the gentleman was fond of his sister. How are her piano lessons coming along? Mr. Darcy's usually stern face softened. She is studying beautifully. She plays for me every evening. I'm sure she is eager to show you her new skills. Precisely. Mr. Darcy shifted in his seat. Speaking of my sister, she has asked that I personally present you with this. He removed a letter from his inner jacket. For me? Lizzy asked, taking the letter. Yes. Bingley and I were to ride past Longbourn and deliver the letter personally. However, seeing that we are crossing paths sooner, I believe you should have it. Thank you. The recipient opened the missive to find an invitation written in the most beautiful and delicate of penmanship. Georgiana wished for Miss Elizabeth Bennet to dine with them on the 24th of December. Lizzy smiled warmly. You may assure Georgiana that I will gladly attend. Mamma does not need me, with so many sisters in the house, to help her prepare our Christmas feast. Mr. Darcy returned a smile and a nod, and Lizzy thought her heart would melt, for Darcy's smile was charming. Had he always been so handsome when not rigid and steadfast? She wished he smiled for her every time they met and spoke openly with her, such as now, rather than stiffly be in her presence. However, her insecurities did not know how to tell Mr. Darcy she liked his light-hearted, gentle demeanour. She admired the hint at his true self beneath the haughty exterior he carried in public. She'd rarely seen this side to Mr. Darcy, mostly when in the presence of his sister. And there was that time in Derbyshire. Ah, Darcy, Miss Elizabeth, sorry to have kept you waiting. Mr. Bingley appeared in the doorway, with his sister and Jane behind him. The men soon left to play their sport, and Miss Bingley served tea. Were you able to find the item? Lizzy inquired of her sister's missing glove. No, said Jane, eyeing a slice of cake. Fear not, for I have gifted a pair of gloves to Miss Bennet, replied their hostess. We shall soon be sisters, and I would not wish for her to attend a dinner without such necessities. Nor I, Lizzy replied, smiling into her tea. Chapter 4. Darcy wiped at his brow. Obtaining the perfect log from his land had been tiresome. His comprehension of a Yule log extended only to what the church deemed appropriate. When Georgiana requested the task, one of many Christmas activities they had embarked upon, Darcy could only comply. Having spent the past couple hours on a search hunt, Darcy and his men placed the prize in the fire. Then the master thanked his staff for their help and excused them. Darcy himself took this opportunity to rest from the endless Christmas projects. This particular holiday was but a week away. The estate still needed tending to and there were deadlines to see to, yet all were paused for Georgiana's sake. The young Miss Darcy had frantically gone over her list of Christmas preparations since Darcy delivered her invitation to Miss Elizabeth. What if there isn't ample food nor drinks come Christmas Eve? Georgiana had been pacing the room, playing with the strings on her riding coat. Shall I send cook for more? I'm certain any feast at Pemberley will suffice, Miss Elizabeth, Darcy spoke to his sister. The young lady turned to face her brother with worried eyes. This would be her first time playing hostess at Pemberley, and Georgiana wanted it to be perfect for her only guest. Yes, I'm sure you're right. Perhaps I should inquire if Miss Elizabeth should be in need of other things. Darcy shook his head with a weary smile. You are overthinking, sister. Go and get your rest. I will have a maid bring you some sandwiches and punch. Georgiana hesitated before hugging her older brother. Thank you, Fitzwilliam. I want Christmas Eve to be memorable for our guest. That it shall be. After his sister's departure, Darcy looked about the room. They had hung greenery and ribbons and ordered extra candles. Pemberley would sparkle and shine come the eve of Christmas. Although he half feared that Georgiana's want of early festivities could bring about bad luck in the new year, Darcy did admire the look of the house. It was more lively and welcoming, especially during these dark, cold winter days. He wondered why Christmas decorations could not appear throughout the month of December. They had also completed many other Christmas pursuits, from making the Christmas pudding, to supporting charity, to visiting friends and neighbors. Decorating the house was one of the last items to complete. Darcy had suggested they invite other young ladies in the town, but Georgiana wanted only Miss Elizabeth Bennet to hear her play the piano. Elizabeth. Darcy met the Bennets when Bingley first leased Netherfield Park. Miss Elizabeth had been cold and distant toward Darcy since. He assumed she saw herself as above him, as unworthy of a nobleman, as he held these prejudices against the whole village. Darcy had assumed country folk were less than city folk. However, he had been proven wrong by many of Bingley's neighbours. They were all just human, no matter wealth, status, nor living conditions. Darcy had also misunderstood Miss Elizabeth. He has since learned that the young woman was rather a kind and caring creature. Her sisters were very dear to her, and she would sacrifice herself for their happiness. She was very much like Darcy, who would do anything for Georgiana. Miss Elizabeth was also intelligent and amusing. She loved books and viewed the positives of hardships with a smile and laughter. Darcy admired this about her. He wondered what more there was to this young woman. He'd been so blinded by his prejudices that he had not noticed her strengths, only her flaws. Now, he realized, Miss Elizabeth was a beautiful soul. He felt the need to seek out her friendship. He wanted a friendship that could grow into something more, into what his best friend Charles has with Elizabeth's older sister. Darcy suddenly felt an ache in his chest at the thought of Charles and his betrothed. They are to marry come the spring. This would mean his friend would have less and less time for riding and other activities they shared together. And should Charles welcome a family, he would be a busy father. This would leave Darcy to be on his own. Darcy would be in need of a new companion. He stared into the fireplace, where the Yule log Saturday. Was this change in Darcy's life the reason Lady Catherine de Bourgh insisted Darcy be engaged by Christmas? She truly did not want to see him alone in the new year. Thank you for listening to the first part of Mr. Darcy's Christmas Wish, a Pride and Prejudice variation, by Lysa Shimkus. Subscribe for more.